Based on the popular web series and now actual Japanese-made anime, RWBY Arrowfell is the second game in the RWBY franchise, excluding mobile and crossovers of course, and is a massive departure from its predecessor, RWBY Grimm Eclipse, a 4-player co-op third-person action-adventure game that actually started out as a humble little fan project that eventually got picked up by Rooster Teeth and was produced on a shoestring budget, which was pretty obvious, let's be real. And as one would expect, it had its problems. Though I already covered all of that in its own review, check it out if you want to learn more. But that was then, and Arrowfell is now. And considering how much the franchise has grown, anime, manga, toys, more than one game, we can assume that this time it got a proper budget. And with industry heavy hitters Wayforward and Arc Systems at the helm, I think it's okay to set our expectations a wee bit higher this time. Alright, we'll put this away for now. So, with such a massive advantage, you'd think Arrowfell would easily be the better game, right? Well, funny thing, Arrowfell definitely gets everything right that Grimm Eclipse got wrong, which was a lot, but it also gets wrong the few things that Eclipse got right. Released at the tail end of 2022, Arrowfell is a side-scrolling action-adventure game that really feels like it's trying to be a Metroid-vania style game, but refuses to commit to it. We join our heroes, RWBY, Weiss, Blake, and Yang, aka Team RWBY, mid-mission as newly christened Huntresses, meaning this takes place mid-Volume 7, if the new duds didn't give that away already. Tasked with wiping out hordes of Grimm infesting the area, which is to say, it's a very thinly veiled tutorial that actually leaves out quite a few things. So let's get into it. Unlike Grimm Eclipse, where each player controlled a single Huntress and can only change characters between stages, Arrowfell is single-playered, but it allows you to swap between the girls on the fly, but not quite the same way as the original TMNT on NES. However, unlike the green machines that each get their own separate health bars, Team RWBY shares a single health bars. Yeah, it's kinda weird, we're gonna get into that later. But basically, it means that none of them can ever be KO'd. It's all or nothing, as each character pulls double duty, acting as unique fighters as well as methods for problem solving via their semblances. Though, just like in TMNT, all of the girls are not created equal. Of the group, team leader Ruby Rose is probably the best. Her scythe gives her the most range with the broadest stroke, and her semblance allows her to dash, including mid-air for fast stage traversal. Plus, she can pass through enemies. Great for avoiding fights with damage sponges. Blake is also cracked, though you wouldn't know it from the tutorial. She can make shadow clones, which from our first introduction teaches us to use them as glorified paperweights.
I wish I had thought of that. I just use mine as a hat rack.
And these clones are pretty OP. Aside from pulling aggro, they can also act as shields blocking projectiles, but even better, when you attack, they attack. Seems like a kind of important detail to leave out of the tutorial, don't you think? Especially since that's not how it works in the show, so I definitely didn't notice it was doing that at first. Plus side though, this means you could have up to 3 attacks going off at once for triple the damage that any other character can do. Plus it is super easy to just cheese half the bosses this way. Yang's ability is pretty much what you'd expect it to be. Yang.
Smash.
Yang has a small AoE that can hit enemies around her, but it also leaves her pretty open if you don't finish them off. So you'll probably just end up using it mostly for its problem solving purpose, smashing huge rocks. Otherwise, surprisingly, she's the weakest character. Yeah, I know, seems like she'd be the one to hit the hardest, especially since she has the shortest range, but she does make up for that by attacking the fastest, so risk versus reward. And then there's the Ice Queen, Weiss.
Hey!
Now RWBY vets might assume that she'd just be rocking her new summoning powers, as that does seem to be her major style nowadays. And hey, it'd be pretty awesome if she had a Soma thing going on, using spirits of Grimm she's slain. But nope, instead, she has the almighty power of making platforms. And they're not even good platforms either. It's not like you can just jump, pop a platform underneath of you anywhere for a pseudo double jump. These platforms appear at a set distance above the ground, regardless of how high you are, so you won't really be breaking the game with these things. And it's awkward as they vanish just after a few seconds. Though, they do release a super weak attack when they do. Great. Though in fairness, if you drop one right beside a really big foe, it can do some solid damage all at once, but it's not really worth the effort. And while every member definitely feels different, combat is still pretty similar regardless, as every character has a basic attack as well as a ranged attack, since as all RWBY fans know, every weapon,
it's also a gun.
But you might not want to be using said ranged attack, like, at all. More on that later. After clearing out the Grimm, we reach our hub world, which is one of the reasons that this game is, at best, a pseudo Metroidvania. It's not one big map that you explore, but instead a lot of smaller ones. As you progress, you'll unlock new areas, which you will be returning to as the story plays out and your abilities level up. There are also small areas that are completely focused on the story, which I won't really be getting into as it's pretty basic and the main villain is pretty obvious. Though, in a major plus over Grimm Eclipse, at least our heroines actually play a major role in said story, with dialogue and everything. Surprising, right? It's their story. But it is still kinda sad that despite the voice cast being on board, they didn't voice over the dialogue segments, instead just opting for these mini sound effects. But hey, at least everyone is front and center for the big boy cutscenes, which are exactly like the show, and a real treat for RWBY fans. And speaking of audio, maybe Wayforward was listening to me when I was griping about Grimm Eclipse. About not having music from the show, because Arrowfell delivers. In fact, it goes hard right out the gate. Loud and bombastic, vocals and everything. It's like, chill guys, it's just a tutorial. But I do appreciate actually having some solid tunes as I run around. Playing errand girl. Yeah, 90% of this game is fetch quests. In the community areas, characters hint at what they want these fully licensed huntresses to go get for them, which include things like soda or ass armor, and none of which is optional, by the way. And then you head off to the mini Metroidvania areas to fetch them. Rinse and repeat until Link tricks you into showing up for an intervention or a boss battle unlocks. The real battle is against your inability to say no. It's also against hordes of monsters and douchebags that want to murder you, that are all barely worth your time, because the combat, exploration, and level up systems are all aggressively mid, foregoing basically everything that makes Metroidvanias shine. For example, stage layouts definitely have that Metroidvania feel to them. Multiple possible pathways to take, with some only being accessible once you've gained new abilities. But it's all super basic. Hidden paths and secrets are pretty much non-existent. You have to basically go everywhere. And most of the areas are so small and are pretty linear that you don't even really need a map screen. Not that there is one, but just saying. And without connecting parts of the map, hidden rooms, or treasures, there's really not that much reason to explore. But wait, I hear you cry. What about all those shiny looking chests scattered about? Surely those are worth hunting down. You mean these ones that are blatantly out in the open? Yeah, they are. But they all have exactly the same thing in them. Skill points, which you can also buy from traveling merchants.
What are you buying?
Skill points are basically this game's version of a level up system. Keep that in the back of your mind for later, it's all gonna come together. Each girl has to be leveled up separately, one skill point at a time. Attack and defense are pretty obvious, but energy and range, not so much. Let's talk about that health bars I mentioned earlier. Now, if we take a quick look, we can see that we've got a string of Zelda-like hearts and an energy bar. But you really just have to toss out your gamer logic and replace it. The green bar above your health is your energy bar, but it also kind of acts as your health bar too. As you take hits, your energy will drop, And when it bottoms out... Bit over dramatic, don't you think? But yeah, you get the idea. And here's where things get iffy. And I totally get what they were going for too. The bar here represents their aura, a type of life force energy shield combo that the RWBY universe uses to justify everyone getting sliced up and shot without actually getting sliced up and shot. And for what it's worth, Arrowfell mimics this pretty well, for better or worse. Real quick, let's compare. In Grimm Eclipse, when you take damage, your aura drops. Run out and take a solid hit, and you're dead. Basically, it runs on Halo logic. Run away, hide, do whatever it takes to not take damage, and it'll regenerate. It's not quite like that in Arrowfell. In Arrowfell, when your aura reaches 0, it doesn't really regenerate, unless you level that up. And again, for each girl. And even maxed out, it never regens 100%. Now why that matters is that if you bottom out, enemies, particularly bosses, will start chunking your hearts fast. Maybe this is just a me problem, but the way it works feels like it should restore your aura each time you lose a heart. But it doesn't. Take that as you will. Also, as I mentioned earlier, you have yourself a ranged attack. A simple shot that eats away at your aura. Gotcha! Something, by the way, that the tutorial completely forgot to mention. Not that it tells you about the gun anyway. And I definitely didn't realize it at first and ate up most of my health. Meaning, you pretty much need to level up your aura first to even make use of the gun without adding a lot of pointless risk. But at that point, why even bother when you could just level up your free to use attack? Of course though, you can just heal both your aura and hearts from drops, as well as pick up money. But here's where I'd say the game really shoots itself in the foot. Enemies will drop all the loot you could ever need. But so does everything else in the environment, and much faster no less. Plus grass and crates, they don't try to murder you. And since enemies don't give experience, drop any special items, grant any new abilities, or really anything special at all, why bother fighting them? Seriously, how can they make such an amateur?
Well, this is awkward.
I mean, other than when the game forces you to in its many ambush sequences. It's all just too simple, and it really does come off as baby's first Metroidvania. And despite being a short game at roughly 5 hours long, Arrowfell's combat loses its luster pretty quickly, mostly due to a lack of evolution that the Metroidvania genre is known for. Comparatively, Grimm Eclipse, which also has a pretty basic and repetitive combat loop, at least matches the look of the early show with some flash and flare, and a minor skill tree, helping it to stand out, where Arrowfell doesn't. Plus, there's always going to be that little bit of fun factor that comes from co-op gaming. Still though, of the two RWBY games, while certainly not as interesting as Grimm Eclipse, Arrowfell clearly is the better made game. It looks and sounds way better with a much better story. Plus, the later boss battles are pretty fun with a Mega Man-ish feel. But regardless, despite all of its improvements over its predecessor, Arrowfell is still a painfully average game that realistically will only appeal to us RWBY fans.